So if you can talk to us about DBN's experience with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Let me start by thanking AADFI for creating this opportunity for us to have this conversation, and most importantly, this very topical issue, which is quite relevant to Africa. Just as a way of introduction, for those who are not familiar with Development Bank of Nigeria, Development Bank Nigeria is a wholesale DFI set up to focus on providing access to finance for micro, small, and medium enterprises, working with other financial institutions, we would call partnering financial institutions. So that's the modus operandi. So we're a wholesale DFI. For us at DBN, the first thing we did, knowing fully well the importance of climate finance, in 2021, we came up with our green finance strategy for the bank after operation for about 4 years, knowing fully well that that's the way to go and knowing the critical role that will form going into what our projections were. So we want to approach it from our internal perspective, and that is, first, how do we ourselves as an organization position ourselves as a green finance organization? And that starts from our capacity building internally, and also come out with clear priority areas where we think will enable us to achieve this objective of green finance. And the first thing we did was to look at even the projects and some of the PFIs we have financed, and we started tagging them green to see what percentage of our portfolio was really green in terms of that, to enable us have a baseline to be able to now move forward. The second thing we did was also see how do we engage externally to be able to catalyze more funding for that, because the funding out there required actually is more out there. And that came out when we did our next year 5-year strategy, which started this year, to see how do we engage to ensure we get. The first thing we did was to create a green finance line, again, specifically dedicated to financing green projects brought forward from our financial institutions that we partner with. And second, we also do it also, how do we also create capacity for them in them working with financial institutions? But because for us, the financial institutions we partner with include commercial banks, microfinance banks, and other financial institutions. So that was quite key to create capacity for them to be able to lend to that area. And then the third thing we did was even the micro, small, and medium enterprises themselves. How do you build capacity for them? So our approach to it was from internal perspective and then external perspective. Then we now know, of course, we need to catalyze funding, and say again that also reach out to our other financial institutions that are focused on green. So from both perspectives, we brought green finance into forefront of whatever we do.
Thank you, Tony. Christian?
Thank you for giving the opportunity for African Bank to just share with you this panel. The bank has been heavily involved even in the climate change and climate financing. The bank is at present, working with its partners. We are developing our climate finance strategy. And through this strategy, we shall provide line of credits to and in collaboration with our funders. And what we do is we work on different dimensions. First is to prepare a project preparation facility just to assist all sorts of, projects that has, some constraints and challenges. And then we have also our FEDA that provides some equity. We also provide line of credit. We have already prepared a big pipeline of projects. We are working in collaboration with the AU and the World Food Program just to assist also in the World Food Program crisis. So in a nutshell, the bank is just working hard on mitigating the risk of the climate change and try to assist the African countries, even when it has impact on the world food actually crisis and the food security. So this is quickly, maybe I can at a later stage go into details of what we have exactly done so far, but we have gone through local and regional actually projects. And one of them, for example, is the solar energy in South Sudan to generate electricity. Another one is for batteries in collaboration with Zambia government and DRC, also in collaboration with international institutions. So the bank is working actually with its partners, not alone. And this is how we try to reach the maximum benefit for the African continent in terms of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian.
Agricultural Finance Institution is a key DFI in Kenya. In terms of our impact towards mitigation of the climate change, I think as an institution, despite the financial challenges that we face, which is basically similar to most of the African DFIs, we have been intentional around creating an impact around the mitigation of climate change. And I think as an institution, one of the ways in which we've been able to do this is basically supporting green projects in our country. We are partnered with Kenya Forest Services, basically to provide scenes, especially to primary schools where we have the so-called 4K clubs, basically which are usually clubs for young people that basically address the issue of climate change. And as a result of this, we've been providing these seedlings on an annual basis. And this has actually gone towards the 15 billion trees that you're supposed to have to plant in the next 5 years as a nation. Remember, the 15 billion trees is a call by our president, and all institutions have been able to align their policies towards the realization of this particular national ambition of planting 15 billion trees in the next 5 years or so. Secondly, I think in line with greening of our portfolio, we have also set aside funds that basically go towards project like afforestation, where basically we've been able to lend money to our farmers to basically go and come up with their own forests, which basically plays into the greater ideal of ensuring that we increase the forest cover in our nation.
Before I start discussing what we at the Bank of Industry in Nigeria are doing regarding our climate finance strategy, I think it's very important that I make one very quick observation. You know, when COVID-19 pandemic hit the world, we saw very fast, decisive action across countries. And we saw innovative financing strategies that were deployed to help address the issue because we felt the threat to humanity. With climate change, which is even a much bigger problem for mankind, we have not seen the same quality of response. And that is where the challenge is. The lack of urgency, the lack of awareness, the lack of critical action at the national level. Now, what we have been doing at the Bank of Industry is to try to raise the level of awareness on the issue of climate change, in addition to the kind of, to identifying the opportunities that exist for financing private sector to be compliant with climate change mitigation and adaptation. Like my brother Tony and all the other responders as panelists have mentioned, look inwards first, and then we deal with the externalities. First thing to do that we did was to put together a sustainability framework and strategy to ensure that we identify where the opportunities are, particularly for private sector, to focusing initially on the mitigation side, which enables many of our customers and clients to adapt their sources of energy to cleaner sources and renewable energy. And then we progress to looking at other ways to promote mitigation. But that framework we put together internally. And we developed those programs that will help with the change in energy sources. And several, at least we supported hundreds, if not thousands of entities in Nigeria to adapt from fossil fuel energy to other cleaner sources. That's in the first instance. Even secondly, with our own operations, we are now adapting to make sure that we are compliant with standards, global standards on climate change. And we're starting to look out now externally at seeing where the opportunities lie, getting the right accreditation with the likes of global, the Green Climate Fund, working through the processes that are required for accreditation with the Adaptation Fund, and aligning ourselves with all those required or relevant certifications that are necessary to be able to access climate funds internationally. But one thing that we also did, we have 6 critical thematic areas that we've seen, that we identified as very important for Nigeria's development and growth in the short to medium term. One of them is climate and sustainability. And from that point of view, we've mainstreamed it in our strategy and in the way we support we assess our credit, and which helps to put it at the forefront of many of our clients who are willing to access funding from the bank of industry. And they now understand that it's very important to be compliant with the requirements of climate change mitigation and adaptation processes.
Kenya Development Corporation is a DFI that was formed out of 3 developmental financial institutions that were merged in the year 2020 to therefore form Kenya Development Corporation. We therefore invest in various sectors, including manufacturing, infrastructure. We are key also in tourism and agri-processing. So of course, based on the various sectors we are investing in, we therefore are quite critical in terms of looking at the impacts the nature of projects we do have on the environment. KDC's strategy has been multifaceted. Number one, this starts actually from the country's strategy in terms of environmental and climate financing. Our president has actually declared himself on this as a country. Kenya hosted COP28, and which we declared in terms of what kind of projects we want to invest in, and what kind of facilities and support we want to give to investors within this space. Equally, as an institution, we've been looking at our strategy, and currently we're looking at our strategic plan and inculcating that into a strategic plan. One is also on greening KDC as a financial institution so that we get the relevant accreditations and we're able to access this financing from the various entities. Number 2 is actually also looking at the organizational structure, having the right skill sets, and we currently now have environmental specialists. We also have social impact specialists on our structure that assist us with from project conceptualization to actually project implementation, so that this issue of climate change is also also facilitated with the various investors, because for some projects they actually are not able to look at it from an environmental perspective. Equally, our other strategy that we're employing is the various partnerships, and we're looking at critical partners that we can work with. Currently, KDC is working with the World Bank in setting up a green fund. As an institution, you also need to look at the various instruments you'd need to use for this green financing. So part of the strategy we are employing as we look at our strategic plan is what kind of instruments, financial instruments, would we be able to create, therefore being able to access this funding.
Thank you very much, Norah. Olympus, please.
Just as a start, the drivers from our side, DBSA point of view, has really been as follows. You know, all the countries that are signatory to the UNFCCC are encouraged to be looking at more ambitious targets. And we know that there are already challenges, you know, achieving the targets that are in place. But the chief thing around the ability to implement activities that drive those targets is the availability of financing. So it is important that the right financing, the right instruments are in place to be able for those targets to be met. So that drives us from a DBSA point of view to say, are we putting in place instruments and offerings that are relevant to countries to help them in that transition? And I think immediately you do that, the quickest thing you start to realize is that obviously the resources, the public resources are limited. And therefore you need to be mobilizing private financing at scale. What it means for us then is to say the limited public resources should be used in an innovative manner in such a way that it allows you to crowd in private investment. So you will see that in most of the instruments that we have put in place from a DBSA point of view, what we seek to do is to use those limited resources to mobilize significant private sector financing. And I think another important thing for us has been partnerships. And these partnerships takes different forms. One of them would be with your UNFCCC financing mechanisms like your GCF. And we know the challenges around that. But I think in spite of that, we have been, I would say, confident that we have been successful in many cases, in spite of the challenges, to be able to tap into significant resources that we then blend with our own resources to advance the climate agenda in South Africa and the region. So our target is really to ensure that the strategies that we put in place are there to support countries, to advance their NDCs, and make sure that the right instruments and offerings are in place.
One of the themes that is coming out is really the importance of mobilizing to support countries, to support clients. So Tony, if you can just give us a couple of examples of what you've been able to do in this space and what has worked, what are some of the challenges been? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, we had set up, we had a green finance line. We've been able to mobilize, we had in partnership with KfW, we're able to mobilize about 25 million euros specifically for green. And I'm glad to announce that about half of that has already been disbursed to a green project. So that's one specific we've done in that area. But beyond that, even from our own resources, we've also been able to partner with the Rural Electrification Agency of Nigeria to specifically to provide funding for mini-grid, solar panels and all that for the micro, small and medium enterprise players in that segment. So that has also been one particular project we're quite happy with, we've partnered with. Beyond that, we also, being a wholesale DFI, working with our participating financial institutions who also have green agenda as a focus. We've also provided specific incentives for them. I would mention one. We have interest drawback, for example, where we encourage financial institutions that lend green to be able to create some interest rebate for them where necessary to encourage them to lend to that. So that's something that we've done specifically and we begin to see the result. Thirdly, fourthly, we also look in area of, especially when you look at the micro side, the micro retail end, and that's where a lot of capacity building, like I had mentioned before, is there. So some of the projects were also, projects were showcasing them to ensure that there's clear awareness of the importance of green finance going forward. And especially when you look at the microfinance segment, where we also cater for, that is the key, a lot of challenge in that area. So we're also working with them and seeing how we can build capacity and provide access to funding for them.
Thank you. Christian, you started talking about projects in Sudan.
Thank you. Thank you for this one. In fact, I have so many things to say. As the chairman today was saying that let's translate the words into acts. And Afrexim Bank has done it. And we are proud to announce at least 3 of them now that shows the partnership, how Afreximbank is pulling the partnership together to just do some very important and viable projects in the continent. The first one, if I can just give an example of El Swidi, this is an Egyptian entrepreneur who is doing solar energy in South Sudan, and the bank has assisted, in 46 million advanced as in terms of financing, and this is ongoing project. A second one that has to do with the development of the special economic zone, and also the enhancement of the creation of batteries that will help Zambia and DRC. And this also in collaboration with UNECA, so you can see the government, the international institutions are on board, as well as the private sector. The third one that has to do with the facility provided here to Kenya, if I can just give some details about it. It's under the Climate Adaptation Facility for the government of Kenya. We have disbursed the first tranche of 800 million to Kenya Climate Change Adaptation Facility. So you can see the bank also is working with its actually partners in terms of members, countries, just to implement the facilities under the climate finance. I think I should stop here because this shows how the bank is really translating words into reality. Thank you.
Examples from you?
Thank you, David. I think for us as Agricultural Finance Corporation, basically we've been internally been working with various sectors in the government sector, basically to address the issue of climate change mitigation. And to this effect, just like I mentioned before, one of the areas in which we have really been focused is the aspect of reforestation, where as a government, we've been very focused in terms of making sure that we increase our forest cover as a nation. And to this effect, I think Agricultural Finance Corporation has been very intentional in terms of its approach to this by making sure that you're able to lend resources towards that direction. And I think part of our portfolio greening has actually been directed towards that. And I think out of our total portfolio, we have actually given more than 5% of our resources towards that. Other than that, I think we've been trying to work with the international development partners to basically point resources, especially from the private sector, towards our institutions so that you can be able to scale up our level of indulgence into this particular space. Just the other day, we signed a cooperation agreement between Kenya Development Corporation and our institution, where basically we will be able to access more than 600 million shillings that is supposed to be, part of it supposed to be geared towards the aspect of climate change mitigation strategies, especially in the ASAL regions, that is arid and semi-arid areas. And I think to that effect, as an institution, we are barely scratched, but there is a host of opportunities in that area. Despite the challenges that we faced, and I think the first challenge that you talked about was from a resources perspective, where basically, as much as maybe institutions want to play into that particular aspect, you realize that from a resource perspective, we are constrained. In terms of the period, of course, the period of these facilities also constraining in itself, and basically that basically shows that there is need and needs to be done to basically address that aspect.
Thank you, Moderator. So at the Bank of Industry, we have been very active in supporting communities and projects with climate mitigation and adaptation funding. Now, we established about 6 solar power mini-grid facilities for communities in the country. And this has helped many of them to develop, to adapt their programs and their energy sources to clean energy, particularly for their own production, industrial production endeavors. Secondly, we have an existing line of credit of about 100 million euros with the Agence Française de Développement, and about half of that has already been disbursed across various projects in the country. We are now, through various funding initiatives of our own, supporting the transformation of gas projects, prevention of gas flaring within the country. As you know, Nigeria has that challenge with gas flaring. We are an oil and gas nation. And the issue has been ongoing for several years, but many of the big oil and gas institutions in the country are now adapting, and we are financing many of them through huge projects from our own funding to enable that gas flaring to be turned into other beneficial projects for the country. So in the nutshell, there's quite a number of investment that has gone in from the Bank of Industry side, and also with the support of international community. And we believe that this is going to continue. We're in talks with a number of development partners, the IFC, the World Bank, on accessing funding that are dedicated to climate mitigation and adaptation in the country. And like I said earlier, we are really pushing on our efforts for accreditation. Thank you.
So for Kenya Development Corporation, one is to be strategic in terms of the kind of products we are offering. As a country, if we are not experiencing drought, we're experiencing heavy rainfall, like we recently experienced 2 weeks ago. That definitely has a direct impact on businesses. So one of the things that we've been able to do is to create a product, and as my colleague has mentioned, specifically for the ASAL counties, to de-risk against loss of livestock. And so we came up with, together with the World Bank, a de-risking program that we are now financing pastoralists, so that then they are able to cash in on their animals in good time, as opposed to losing their livestock during the drought period, but also to be able to create a buffer so that they prepare for the drought, because we see it coming. Another product that we have developed as an institution is the climate financing, climate shock financing, which we now want to roll out as part of what we're going to do to support the recent floods, businesses that were affected by the floods. And this is a product that we will institutionalize, and once we've been able to anchor it in the institution, it will then be able to attract a lot of other development partners to bring in resources into that fund. Equally, as a different instrument, KBC is looking at creating a green fund. So far we've set up a fund which has a seed capital of about $40 million. We're currently reaching out to various DFI institutions, both locally and internationally, and various pension funds to invest into the green fund. The fund will then directly invest into greening businesses, and in specific sectors. We're looking at e-mobility, as my colleague from AfDB has mentioned. They're really heavily supporting Kenya on that. We're looking at green buildings. So this green fund will be targeting to raise about $160 million. We've already raised the seed capital, so we are looking for partners to actually work with us on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Olympus, please.
From our end, especially because it happens to be an area of business where we have presence in, and we really started an early stage from a planning point of view, assisting municipalities in ensuring that their plans results in infrastructural projects that are fundable. But the key thing is you find most of the time those projects at the end of the planning process might not necessarily be best positioned for climate funds to be deployed. So what we do is we go earlier on and ensure that as municipalities plan, there is a clear understanding of how you integrate climate issues into the planning to ensure that the resultant plans are fundable from a climate financing point of view. And I think that, that has been key for us. But we have gone even beyond that to start thinking about how do you ensure that even issues around biodiversity, nature-based interventions are included as part of that integrated planning. That is very important, as you would know that, to approach climate in an integrated manner, you cannot, ignore the biodiversity and nature-based issues. And maybe let's just talk about adaptation broadly. So we ensure that that is taken care of earlier on. And I think it was also mentioned earlier, talking about adaptation, the challenges around, ensuring that financing is in place. And I think one of the key issues is the ability to develop instruments that are positioned for that. One thing that I just wanted to mention from a DBSA point of view that is quite recent has been the approval for funding alongside the GCF for a water reuse intervention, where we had approval of 235 million that we are matching from the DBSA point of view. And I think from an adaptation point of view, it's a very instrumental intervention, both in the public space, but also in the private space. And for us, that's the idea that I talked about earlier, to say, use limited public resources in an innovative and clever way to crowd in significant private sector investment.
Sorry. No, thank you very much. I'm glad we had that question, because going back to, I think it was Tony Nyong, the keynote speaker, who said we mustn't just talk about the challenges, we must also talk about the opportunities. And I think what we've been able to demonstrate with that question is that there are lots of opportunities, and perhaps the challenge is getting things to scale, right? And so my next question is going to be a bit more focused around some of the challenges that you face. And I'd like to sort of take this question in two parts. I'd like to hear from the national DFIs first. DBN, KDC, Agricultural Finance Corporation, Bank of Industry. So hear what are the challenges from a national DFI perspective, and then perhaps ask Christian and Olympus to speak from a more regional DFI perspective, just to get an understanding of, where the challenges are similar and where they may be different. So Tony, if you can kick us off on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In the interest of time, I'll just briefly mention four. As in the first one is, you don't have a comprehensive database of where this funding are. So you go out looking for a different area. So that's one key thing. The second one is, like Dr. Young mentioned today, the process of even getting accreditation is quite tedious and very arduous, So going through that process alone. And to achieve that, you need to have the required technical skills, technical competence, technical capacity internally to be able to go through those rigorous process. And I think that's a major challenge, I will also say. And part of the things, again, when you're presenting some of requests for some of this funding, do you have the robust pipelines of projects? So that's, I would say, four areas that I think are pretty much challenging. In interest of time, I will just be brief on that.
If I may add some, that we as African Bank, we are facing always, is also the long tenor of this type of facility of renewable energy and climate finance. So it's a little bit difficult to find a long tenor. Also, the African bonds in terms of cost as well, it's not accredited as other international bonds. This is another constraint that adds to the cost, and mostly the lack of preparedness of the African countries to prepare, like what he was saying, that we lack a concrete pipeline that helps us to advance the transactions, because I always say that we have the money is here, but whenever there are viable projects and attractive projects for the financiers, it's a matter of just preparing those projects. And that's why African Bank has done a lot of actually side programs to assist in the preparedness of those facilities and project finance. I'll just leave the floor to others.
For me, the first one is about resources. Basically, when you look, most of the African development finance institutions are facing these challenge of capital adequacy and the resources. And you find that this is basically aggraved by the fact that even from an international perspective, the way resources are located, basically there is always some element of or risk perception when it comes to African development finance institutions. And this basically skews the resources to countries where the financial system are more developed, and as a result, we keep on lacking in terms of this. The second part of it is also about technical capacity internally for most of the African development finance institutions. You realize that there is a need to develop technical expertise on matters climate financing, and this again plays against resourcing of resources towards these institutions. And I think lastly, it's also about lack of data around climate financing from most of the African development finance institutions. There is need to come up with relevant data that should be able to inform the right policy frameworks and also the right strategies that should be able to unlock the great potential that there is in terms of these resources. Thank you.
I want to point to the issue of the perception of risk. Now, that is very critical because that creates a situation where the funding does not get into the right projects. And as long as we have that challenge, it will be difficult to finance any project that looks at mitigating and addressing climate change issues. Now, we believe that our insurance companies need to play a greater role in de-risking this sector. There needs to be a greater push by many of our innovators in the financial industry to come up with solutions to address this perception of riskiness of green projects. And that, I think, is going to be one of the ways forward.
I think one of the challenges that we've experienced and seen is the lack of standardization in terms of policies or what are the greening requirements for the different entities that have these funds. If this could be standardized, so you're forced to comply, based on where you want to access the funding from, which definitely becomes also another costly affair. My colleague has also mentioned lack of expertise. Of course, this is a huge challenge for African DFIs. Without those expertise, and if at all you're accessing these funds, most of the time it will come with technical assistance, which allows you then to get an expert on board. That tells you lack the capacity internally to be able to access this funding. Also, the high upfront costs that are involved in accessing the funds and in also developing the pipeline. Remember, for you to be doing these investments, they are high-cost investments based on from the investor's perspective, meaning they need a very huge cash outlay. Therefore, the riskiness of carrying out these investments within the greening space and the duration it takes also is what a lot of these DFIs face as challenges in terms of looking at the return on investments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the common theme you hear, especially among developing countries, is a legitimate one around the expectations in terms of financing that is made available as per commitment from the donor countries versus what we see on the ground. And this, I guess, is made worse by the current global tensions that we are having, where attention is shifted elsewhere as opposed to the commitments that have been made. But I think the flip side of that is to say, when you talk about the available resources, the question becomes, are we really successfully tapping into those resources? And that talks to back to what has been mentioned around the capacity to really put together programs and projects that are investable. And that goes back to talking about capacity issues. And, we've just been having meetings with our colleagues around the, working group on climate change within AADFI. And those are the specific issues that we see as key to unlock, so that we don't only talk about the resources being made available, but we can demonstrate that at least for the resources that are there, we are able to deploy. I think for me, that is quite key. But I think when you talk to that, you can't escape the question of saying how do you do that if you look at instruments that you want to deploy versus the indebtedness of countries in the continent? How do you get around that? So I guess the question becomes, should we be looking at, swapping the debt for climate financing? Is that the right instruments? Probably we need to be looking at those questions and saying, what is the right responses? Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Thank you very much. First of all, it's been a very rich discussion. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to touch on all the issues. So what I'm going to I'd like to try and get to some of the questions we have on Menti. So I'll just go through them very quickly. If I can have them up one by one, please. And then if anyone on the panel wants to react. So the first one is, who are the specific FIs that fund DFIs green projects?
To present your projects to attract the funding. So there are several. I think in terms of that, I would say to answer that specifically.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think it's becoming more and more mainstream. So essentially, we are getting to a point where if you are not doing quote unquote green, whatever that means, you're not going to be able to access international finance. And part of the issue is what qualifies as green, because what qualifies as green in Kenya is different from what may qualify as green in Egypt, which may be different from what qualifies as green in France or the UK or wherever. So that's a big part of the issue. Question 2, and I think we touched on this. Question 2 is about risk perception. And it says, it's been said that the perception of risk is a major hindrance to accessing, I would say, achieving the 2.7 trillion, because the 2.7 trillion is not there yet. We need to find it. Yeah. How do we overcome this, individually or collectively? Any takers? Christian?
Thank you very much. I think we need to prepare ourselves. We always blame others, but we need also we ourselves start to work within the African continent, starting from the government, financial institutions, private sector, capacity building, and so forth. If we are ready with this portfolio and with this project pipeline, we'll be able to access the market, and easily, by the way. As I mentioned earlier, the financiers are looking for viable projects. We need to start, everything in parallel, not in sequential, because sequential, it will take a lot of time. But we need to be well prepared from the capacity building, from the project preparations, from access to partners who are really keen to work with us and work in the African continent, because I think this is the most lucrative continent now in the world to make business and investment. Thank you.
And just to add to that, again, going back to the opening, I keep coming back to the point about, yes, climate change is a challenge, but in that challenge, there's also lots of opportunity. I mean, we look at the renewable energy landscape in Kenya. That, and I think there's a number, I think it's, I won't mention a number because I'll probably get it wrong. So on to the next question. We are aware that Africa is the least contributor to the climate change crisis, but the biggest receiver of the catastrophes from climate change and least recipient of global climate funding. How do we navigate this?
And it's really around the capacity within institutions and maybe even within countries to be able to tap into these resources. I was having a conversation with colleagues that it is very interesting that every time there's a new mechanism set up to finance any initiative, Africa always starts at readiness, while others are tapping into the financing. And I think the problem is that when we respond to one initiative, we don't build a base that is sustainable for the future. So we need to change our thinking and make sure that even as we talk about, let's say, GCF now and readiness for GCF, we think beyond that. We build a base that outlives that initiatives and can benefit us in the next initiatives that comes up. Thanks.
Thank you, Olympus. Next question. What opportunities do you have for MSMEs for accessing capacity building, financing, and sensitization? I see DB and Bank of Industry here.
Yeah, I think very interesting, because once we hear MSME, that resonates well with us. So that's why I was smiling. Yeah, I think in terms of capacity building, yes, I'd mentioned before that working with the PFIs, we of course provide capacity building for them, showcase some of the green projects that have been financed, especially for the MSMs themselves, because that's quite key for them. So we provided that across the country at different levels, even at the rural area, just to let them understand the opportunities available for that. So I think that in terms of capacity availability is something that DBN is quite strong on, and I'm sure BOI too are very strong in that area, providing those capacity, using experts to train where necessary, using experts to get their project ready to be funded as a green project. So those capacities are something that DBN is doing, and I'm sure Shubatu will also confirm that BOI2 is also in the area.
What we've been doing is to encourage, we work through a number of business development service providers to make sure that we improve the capacity of MSMEs to access funding. And part of their KPIs includes this creation of awareness amongst MSMEs on the opportunities for accessing green funds. And I believe that that has been quite successful in the recent times, and we will continue to ramp up efforts on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much to my expert panel for the answers, for the lively discussion. Thank you for being such an engaging and engaged audience. And thank you, moderator, for forgiving us for going over time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A big round of applause. Everybody, hands up. Everybody. A big round of applause for them. Well done, well done. Good stuff, good stuff, good stuff. Thank you so much indeed.